If you're enjoying this podcast from us here at Which, then why not become a Which member? Right now, we've got a special offer, especially for podcast listeners, meaning you can choose any of our 3 membership tiers for 50% off the usual price. Starting at just £39.50 for a full year, you can get Which magazine delivered direct to your door. For the same price, you could also choose a digital Which subscription, giving you access to all of our product reviews, the Which app, and the digital edition of Which magazine. What's more, you'll also be able to use the Ask Which service for personalised one-to-one buying advice. Or why not get a full access Which subscription for just £49.50 for a full year? Don't forget, that's 50% off the usual price. To join Which or to find out more, just head to which.co.uk/podcast offer. That's which.co.uk/podcast offer, or click the link in the description for today's podcast for 50% off a Which annual subscription.
When life gives you questions, Which? Get answers.
Welcome to the Which Money Podcast, your weekly hit of money news and personal finance hacks to help make you better off. I'm your host, Lucia Ariane, and here's what's coming up this week.
We're all pretty prepared for tax rises, for a budget of pain, and I think it's fair to say that the Chancellor has delivered on that.
Many more people worry about inheritance tax than actually end up having to pay it. So the latest figure on that is around 4% of estates every year will end up with an inheritance tax bill.
This week, we're with you slightly earlier than normal to get you up to speed on everything you need to know from the budget. Now, in July, Rachel Reeves became the first female Chancellor, and today she delivered the much anticipated speech, laying out what the country's finances look like and what it means for you.
This is a moment of fundamental choice for Britain. I have made my choices, the responsible choices. Restore stability to our country. We on these benches commend those choices, and I commend this statement to the House.
Rachel Reeves wrapping up her speech there, and in one of his final acts as leader of the Conservative Party, here's how former Prime Minister Rishi Sunak responded.
They said they wouldn't fiddle the figures. They have. They said they wouldn't increase borrowing. They have. They said they wouldn't raise taxes on working people. They have. Broken promise after broken promise, and it is the working people of this country that will pay the price.
Well, joining us to digest and debrief, it is our budget dream team here today. Which Money editor Jenny Ross and Director of Public Policy at AJ Bell, Tom Selby. Hello.
Hello.
Hello and welcome back. This has been a budget that's been in the headlines for months already. Before we dive into the detail, was it as we expected it to be, Jenny?
Well, we were promised tax hikes and we got them. So in that sense, yes, it was as expected. But as you mentioned, Lucia, we have had weeks, months of speculation swirling. And so not all of those rumours sort of came to fruition. And some of those tax rises happened in places that we maybe weren't expecting and didn't happen in other areas that we were expecting. So a bit of a mixed bag. But Rachel Reeves certainly delivered on the promise of raising those taxes to try and address that much talked about £22 billion black hole.
Well, before we go deep into taxes, Tom, it was only on Monday that Keir Starmer was warning that it would shine a harsh light on the public finances. Was it as bad as you were expecting?
It was pretty harsh. Yeah, they've gone line by line through the alleged overspend by the previous government, which I think was their way of shining a harsh light on what the other lot did prior to coming into power. We've had a long period of expectation management ahead of this budget and warnings of how dire the fiscal situation is. So in a way, the harsh light had kind of already been shone. We were all pretty prepared, as Jenny said, for tax rises, for a budget of pain, and I think it's fair to say that the Chancellor has delivered on that.
Well, taxes then. As you say, we all knew this budget would be all about tax rises, so let's unpick some of those. Labour promised through the election campaign that there'd be no rises in national insurance, VAT or income tax. Now, there were some question marks recently about this. Jenny, what was announced today?
Yes, there have been many question marks raised in the past few weeks about what constitutes a working person. But we won't get into that now.
It's come up a lot today, hasn't it?
It has come up an awful lot. But we'll set that aside for now and focus on, let's take income tax first. So income tax rates haven't been touched for years. I mean, that was a decision made by the previous Conservative government to freeze the thresholds at which you pay different rates of tax. That started in 2021 and is due to last all the way up to 2028. Now, there have been murmurs ahead of the speech today that Rachel Reeves would decide to extend that even further. And I think a lot of us had sort of priced that in, really. But she delivered, I guess this was one of the more pleasant surprises of the speech, in saying that actually she won't make that call. And from 2028, 2029, income tax thresholds will start rising by inflation again. So finally, we'll see the end of this horrible phenomenon called fiscal drag, where people's incomes are going up, but tax thresholds aren't going up in line with that, so it drags more and more people into paying higher
Stealth tax.
Stealth tax, exactly that. So still a few more years to wait for that to fade away, but it's good news, really.
So that's income tax. Tom, what about national insurance?
So national insurance for employees remains unchanged. There was some talk from Rachel Reeves that she'd had calls from certain people to reverse the cut in national insurance rates that the previous Chancellor had introduced. Clearly, that would have gone against their manifesto commitment, so they've decided not to do that. But as expected, we've seen a hike in employer national insurance. So it's gone up from 13.8% to 15%. So a slightly lower increase than had been trailed. But crucially, the point at which employers have to pay that national insurance, so the wage level has been almost cut in half, so down from £9,100 to £5,000. So all in, they expect that to raise £25 billion a year. So a huge chunk of the money that the Chancellor said that she needed to raise is coming from employer national insurance. And a big part of the debate ahead of this budget, of course, has been the extent to which that rise will be passed on to, I hate to say it, working people. We'll have to wait and see. Clearly, businesses faced with that big an increase in their costs have got a limited set of choices. So they can either spend a bit less, so invest a bit less, for example. They can spend a bit less on remuneration, so perhaps lower pay rises for employees, a bit less on their pensions as well. So they may look to review pension arrangements. Or some employers might say, actually, we can absorb this. The other way, of course, is that they may increase the prices that they charge. So one way or another, if you hike taxes on businesses by £25 billion a year, there is going to be a knock-on impact on consumers, but it's likely to be varied depending on the company and how they deal with it.
And still on tax then, changes to capital gains tax and inheritance tax were widely trailed ahead of today's speech. Jenny, do you want to start us off? What's new here?
Yeah, let's start with inheritance tax, which has been the subject of a lot of speculation, not just today actually, but in previous budgets as well. The rules have gone unchanged for a long time, and it's one of those taxes that really incites absolute rage in some people. But it's important to say that many more people worry about inheritance tax than actually end up having to pay it. So the latest figure on that is around 4% of estates every year will end up with an inheritance tax bill. Threshold at which you start paying inheritance tax is £325,000. And there is an additional allowance if you are passing your main property on to what's known as a direct descendant, so basically your children. As a couple, in total, you could pass on up to £1 million between the two of you before any inheritance tax is due at all. Now, one of the changes announced today is that the freeze on those thresholds has been extended. It was originally going to stay the same until 2028. They will remain fixed until 2030. Now, that is significant because more and more people are being dragged into inheritance tax because those thresholds have remained unchanged. It's actually not been touched since 2009, and if it had risen in line with inflation, it should be up over £500,000 now instead of £325,000. So yeah, inevitably more people will be caught within the inheritance tax net, but it will still be a relatively small proportion.
And Tom, there was quite a big change on pensions and how they're going to be taxed. Can we get your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so the worst fears of people ahead of the budget weren't realised. So the big worry amongst most people was that their tax-free cash entitlement was going to be reduced or abolished altogether. That hasn't happened. We also haven't had any changes to pensions tax relief. So some stability there, but there has been quite a major change announced in the way that pensions are treated on death. So at the moment, you can if you die before age 75, you can pass on your pension pot completely tax-free to your nominated beneficiaries, so no IHT to pay, actually no tax at all to pay. If you die after age 75, then you can pass it on and it's taxed in the same way as income when your beneficiary comes to make a withdrawal. Now, that was always quite a generous set of rules. It was described by Rachel Reeves as a loophole. It was actually something that was formally announced with quite a big splash by George Osborne and David Cameron, I think, in 2016. But what that's led to is pensions being used as a vehicle to pass money on down the generations rather than to deliver an income in retirement, which of course is the primary purpose. So the Chancellor's announced that untouched pension pots on death will be subject to IHT. Now, we don't have details on exactly how that's going to work, but it's not going to come in until April 2027, which tells you that they recognise that doing something like this isn't going to be straightforward. So, for example, there will be people who have taken decisions about their pensions today based on the inheritance tax rules that exist now. So the fact that you can pass on your pension potentially tax-free on death. So for example, there'll be people who have transferred from defined benefit schemes to defined contribution schemes because of that tax benefit. There'll also be people who've made big contributions to defined contribution schemes with the hope of passing money on tax efficiently to their beneficiaries on death. So the government hasn't said anything about whether those people will be protected or not. We've got a 12-week consultation where we're going to go through all the details of this, but it's not going to be in place until April 2027. So quite a big change, quite a complicated change. And I think the key to that will be exactly how it's implemented and whether there is any protection in place for people who've taken action today based on the rules as they exist today.
So a big change there. Well, we'll have to come back to that when we have more details. Capital gains tax then next. Jenny, how will this be changing?
First off, a bit of back to basics about when capital gains tax is charged. It is due on any profits you make when selling certain investments, so investments outside an ISA, and second properties as well. It's not due on your main home. You can make up to £3,000 in gains every year before capital gains tax is due. That is an allowance that has been slashed quite a few times in recent years, but it will remain at that level for now. What is changing is the rate of capital gains tax that you pay if you do owe it. At the moment, those rates differ depending on the type of asset that you're selling. So if you're selling a second property, you will pay either the lower rate of 18% or the higher rate of 24%. But the rates are lower if you're selling other assets. At the moment, 10% at the lower rate or 20% at the higher rate. What's happening there is those rates are going up in line with the rates that are due on second homes. So if you do owe capital gains tax, it will either be due at 18% or 24%. And actually those changes kick in today. I guess, to avoid a big sell-off of shares and people taking action to avoid being hit by a higher bill. But ISAs, still exist. The tax-free advantage of ISAs still exists. They haven't been affected by any changes announced in the budget today. So that is always your first port of call if you do have an investment portfolio. Make the most of your £20,000 ISA allowance, because any money within that shelter will be able to grow completely free of capital gains tax and any other tax for that matter. So do make the most of your ISA allowance. And actually the same applies to pensions as well. Any money you pay into a pension will be able to grow free of tax.
So second homeowners then, they won't face a capital gains tax hike, but stamp duty on second homes will be higher following today's budget, won't it?
That's right. This is a bit of a case of the Chancellor giving with one hand and taking with the other. So I think many landlords and second homeowners will have breathed a sigh of relief. The capital gains tax on second property, the rates there have not changed. So the rate that you'll pay now is 5%, up from 3%. And as with the capital gains tax change, that kicks in immediately.
Okay, and there are other tax rises we should give a quick mention to as well. I'm thinking private school fees, smoking, alcohol. Anything else come to mind?
All the fun stuff there. On a slightly nerdier note, there was a change to the inheritance tax relief that you can get when you invest in AIM stocks, so alternative investment market stocks. So at the moment, you can get up to 40% tax relief. So essentially on death, you don't have to pay inheritance tax. That's been halved to 20%. So a reduction in the benefit of holding those stocks from a death benefits perspective. But I think looking at the reaction from players in that market, they're actually quite relieved. So there had been rumours of speculation that might be removed. And obviously that would have a significant impact on those investors. So even though the benefit has been reduced, there is still an IHT benefit to holding those stocks. And I think a big sigh of relief for a lot of people in that market.
And shall we circle back then to private school fees, smoking, alcohol? Does seem funny to bundle those together, I should say.
Yeah, I'll give you the top lines on those. So private school fees will incur VAT as of January 2025. On smoking, there will be a new tax levied on vaping liquid from 2026. Tax will also increase on rolled tobacco. And then with alcohol, in most cases, tax will be rising, but there's an exception for draft beer, which is going to cost you a penny less in the pub.
Some good news then, I suppose.
Yes, yeah, we'll take it when we can.
Well, we've covered so much already, but after a very quick break, we'll be back with plenty more, including the changes to pensions and benefits.
With so many sales on these days, how do you know when you've seen a good deal? We make it easier by trawling through the deals for you to find genuinely good prices on genuinely good products, all packaged up into a free monthly newsletter. Using internal pricing data and our own market knowledge, we keep an eye on price changes and let you know whether a product is at its cheapest point. From bargains on TVs to discounts on laptops, the products we share have all been put under the Which microscope, meaning we only recommend deals on items we know work well. Our expert advice cuts through the noise to share reductions and reviews which we think will interest you. So make sure you sign up for our brand new Deals newsletter to help you grab the genuine bargains. Just head to which.co.uk/WP_deals. That's which.co.uk/WP_deals.
Now then, can we move on to the state pension and benefits? And the state pension first, Tom. So the government has already faced criticism by some pensioners over the change in which the winter fuel allowance is given out. But has there been any good news today for pensioners?
A bit of good news, but we already knew about it, to be honest. So the key argument that the government has had when criticised about the winter fuel payment decision has been we've got the state pension triple lock, and actually the value of that triple lock is worth more than the winter fuel payment decision. And they've argued that winter fuel payment decision means that they can keep the triple lock. Now, whether that's the case or not is open to debate, but that's what they've been saying. So they've confirmed that the state pension will increase by 4.1%. So that's in line with average earnings in the 3 months to July. So that's an inflation busting increase in the state pension. The full state pension will be worth almost £12,000 a year as a result of that. Now, the government is going to have to deal with that issue of keeping thresholds frozen while increasing the value of the state pension means at some point in the next few years, the full state pension is going to be worth more than the personal allowance. So the full state pension would effectively be subject to income tax. So that's a political difficulty they'll have to deal with down the line. But at the moment, they're seeing that as good news, and that's good news for retirees, clearly. They've also said that they'll apply that 4.1% increase to pension credit as well. So pension credit paid to lower income pensioners. Normally, that only increases in line with inflation. So that's an above inflation increase to the value of pension credit as well, which is good news for lower income pensioners. As I said earlier, there haven't been any major changes to pensions taxation, which is good news in and of itself, of course, other than the changes around death benefits. So pension tax relief and tax-free cash unchanged. I'd give that a qualified positive in that it gives people a bit of stability, but in reality, we're going to be back here again with rumour and speculation about tax-free cash, in particular in 12 months' time. And I think the government's missed a bit of an opportunity there to create a bit of stability for people by committing to keeping things as they are, to committing to a pensions tax lock. They haven't done that. And so while it's a bit of stability for now and a bit of good news for now, the danger is we're going to keep having that destabilising rumour and speculation further down the line.
And we talk about benefits then. Jenny, what benefits came up? I know Universal Credit did.
It did. So this is good news for recipients of Universal Credit because it means they will get to keep more of their payments. That is because the amount of debt repayments that can be deducted from Universal Credit will reduce from 25% to 15%. And what that means is that people will, on average, get an extra £420 a year. So pretty significant. Then also quite significant was a change announced to carers allowance. Now that pays up to £81.90 a week if you have caring responsibilities. So that's caring for someone who's older or disabled for more than 35 hours a week. As things stand, you are only allowed to earn up to £151 a week and still qualify for that benefit. If you go over that amount, even if it's by a few pence, you will forfeit all of your allowance. And the government can then go and claw back anything that they've paid you over that amount. So it's really quite punitive and has left people, in a really difficult situation when they're already facing big challenges. So the change now means that carers will be able to earn an extra £45 a week before they start forfeiting that benefit. That means the cap on your earnings over the course of a year will go up to £10,000 and you won't lose any of the benefit.
And can we move then now to wages and specifically what's changed for those on lower wages, Jenny?
The good news is that minimum wage has gone up across all age brackets. So if you're 21 or over, you will get £12.21 an hour from next year, up from £11.44. That will mean an extra £1,400 a year for a full-time worker. And if you are aged 18 to 20, you will also see an increase from £8.60 an hour to £10 an hour. And that's part of the government working towards ending up, with a single minimum wage rate paid to all adults regardless of their age.
Well, before we wrap up, we have covered so much ground, but is there anything we've missed? Any miscellaneous points that you just want to give a quick mention to?
Gosh, there were all sorts that fit into this box. There was a little bit on air passenger duty, on short haul flights. I think it was an extra couple of quid that you could face, unless you're travelling by private jet, in which case it will be a few £100s more that you'll end up paying in air passenger duty. But something that will affect more people than that is the cap on bus fares. That has gone up from £2 to £3. And while we're on transport, actually, this wasn't in the speech, but the government is looking at increasing the cost of rail cards by £5. They're currently all in the region of around £30.
That's quite a big increase, isn't it?
It is quite significant. Tom, you were saying you've just bought yours, so you've got in there just in time.
Got in there under the bar.
Yeah. Well, actually, mine runs out in November, so I need to go quickly, or maybe I'm too late. Tom's face says I'm too late.
No, you're not. It hasn't been confirmed, Lucia. So everyone in that boat who needs to renew their rail card, act sooner rather than later.
Yeah, you need to get after that. I think I always kind of smirk when I see governments talking about raising huge sums of money from clamping down on tax avoidance. I think we get it at pretty much every budget, and this was no different. So Rachel Reeves said that she's hoping to get £6 billion a year by cracking down on fraud and tax avoidance schemes. Now, we'll see whether that actually materialises or not. It's quite difficult to do that. She also said she'd crack down on benefit fraud. That raised another £4 billion. So £10 billion there of savings being made by cracking down on fraud, which is notoriously difficult. And I think overall, the thing that's not to be missed here is that this is quite a historic, tough budget for businesses in particular. The number of tax rises in here, £40 billion of tax rises, is huge, and the knock-on impact that's going to have on the UK economy and growth and things like that, we'll see how that goes. But make no mistake, this is a massive budget with huge amounts of stuff in it.
Well, as you say, huge budget. We've covered a lot of that stuff that was in it. Was there anything that wasn't in it that you expected, or maybe that you're even disappointed that it didn't come up today?
So we would have liked to have seen some certainty and stability around the pensions tax rules. So the argument that we've been making to the Chancellor for the last few months is that actually by saying nothing at the budget about pensions taxation, you're creating instability for people who are doing the right thing and committing their money to a pension potentially for decades. I think that's part of the thing that gets lost in all this, is actually people are making a huge commitment when they save in a pension. And yes, there are tax benefits, both in terms of tax relief, tax-free growth, and the fact that you can get 25% tax-free. But if you're in your 20s, you can't touch that money for 30 years. So it seems to me that the least a government could do was say the rules as they are today will remain the same while you're saving for retirement. I think at the moment, people have this sense that the goalposts could be moved at any point in time, and it doesn't engender confidence. So I think that was just a bit of a missed opportunity there, because I'd be surprised if they do anything dramatic on pensions tax relief or tax-free cash, primarily because I think the public sector unions would go berserk if they did. So a bit of a missed opportunity there, but that's probably the only thing I'd say was missing.
Yeah, I'd agree with Tom. I mean, every single budget, there are, the rumour mill goes into overdrive when it comes to pension tax rules and tax relief. We all know that engagement with pensions is a problem anyway, so certainty about what the rules mean and that they will remain fixed over the long term would go a long way. But as we said at the top, so much of this budget was trailed before the event, so our expectations were well and truly managed. I don't think there were any glaring omissions or big surprises, and I think that's just the way that they planned it.
Well, thank you both so much for coming on the show today. What a bumper episode, literally recorded just a couple of hours after the speech. So thank you again both for coming in today.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Well, a huge thank you again to Jenny and Tom for coming on the show today, and to you for listening to this week's episode of the Which Money podcast. If you enjoyed today's show, please do hit subscribe to make sure you catch our new episodes as soon as they drop. For daily money news and advice, you can find us on social media at Which Money and online at which.co.uk/money. And we also have a free money newsletter, which is delivered to your inbox every Monday. To sign up, visit which.co.uk/money newsletter. This episode of the Which Money podcast was presented by me, Lucia Ariano, and produced and edited by James Rowe.
Next time you need to get work done on your home, or your car, or your garden, make sure you choose a trader you can trust. And don't just choose any trader, choose a Which trusted trader. Our trading standards professionals only endorse traders who've passed our rigorous assessment that includes credit reports, customer satisfaction surveys, reference checks, and interviews. When we say a trader's good enough to display our Which Trusted Trader logo, you can trust us. But don't take our word for it. Search Which Trusted Traders online to see our directory of around 4,000 traders. Every customer review you read there is verified genuine by our moderators, so you can choose with confidence. To find a local trader you can trust, search Which Trusted Traders or go to which.co.uk/traders. That's which.co.uk/traders. Everybody needs a trader they can trust.